Good morning, sixth grade. We are reading a story called The Horse Snake. It takes place in the South China Seas. It is a story that is a autobiography. It's told from a person's perspective that actually lived through these events. It is a true story. So remember, all the events in here are documented and they are all based on true events. So the story takes place as we're following along. It says, despite all his courage, there was one creature in the jungle that Tank always tried to avoid. Tank is our main character, and he avoided the snake. And there was one kind of snake that was more dangerous than any other snake. It was called a horse snake. In some areas, people called it the bamboo snake because it was long as a full-grown bamboo tree. In other regions, the people called it thunder or lightning snake because it attacked so fast and with such power that its victims had neither time to escape nor the strength to fight it. In our area, we called it the horse snake because it could move as fast as a thoroughbred. Those are the racing horses that people bet on. That horse that races at top speed is just as fast as this horse snake. Can't outrun it. One night, a frightened friend of our family's banged on the door and asked us to let him in. When crossing the rice field in front of our house on his way home from a wedding, he had heard the unmistakable hiss of a horse snake. We became very worried, not only for us and our friend, but also for the cattle and the other animals we raised. It was too far into the night to rouse all our other neighbors and go in search for the snake. The signal that a dangerous wild beast was on the loose was a buffalo horn. Now, we have something called Instagram, and in today's day and age, we can call somebody on the phone, send them a text message, Instagram them a picture of the horse snake. But back then, there was no way to reach the entire village. Imagine trying to reach everyone in your small little town and tell them that there's a wild animal out without any technology. So they would make this sound on the horn and the signal that a dangerous beast was in the loose. A few seconds later, we heard three long quivering sounds of a horn at the far end of the hamlet answering our warning. So that would be like your text message or your Instagram message coming back to you. The sound of the horn coming back, the noise. We presumed that the whole hamlet was now on guard. I stayed up that night listening to all the sounds outside while my father and my cousin sharpened their hunting knives. Shortly after midnight, we were startled by the frightened neighing of a horse in the rice field. Then the night was still, except for a few sad calls of nocturnal birds, nocturnal meaning at night only, and the occasional roaring of the tigers in the jungle. So the neighing horse was pretty scared, but then it just stopped neighing. The next day in early morning, all the able-bodied men of the hamlet is a small village, gathered in front of our house and divided into groups of four to go look for the snake. My father and my cousin grabbed their lunch and joined the search party. They found the old horse that had neighed the night before in a rice field. The snake had squeezed the horse to death. So basically it had wrapped itself around the horse's chest and smashed it, and all of the horse's ribs were broken. But the snake had disappeared. Everybody agreed that it was the work of the one giant horse snake, which had terrorized our area as far back as anyone could remember. The horse snake usually eats small game, such as turkeys, monkeys, and chickens and ducks, but for some unknown reason, sometimes it will actually attack people. And even cattle, like horses and stuff like that. Big stuff. A fully grown horse snake can reach the size of a king python. But unlike pythons, horse snakes have an extremely poisonous bite. One bite, and within a couple of minutes, you're dead. Because of their bone-breaking squeeze and fatal bite, they are one of the most dangerous creatures of the entire upland. Not good. The men searched all day, but at nightfall they gave up and went home. My father and my cousins looked very tired when they returned. My grandmother told them to go right to bed after their dinner, and that she would wake them up if she or my mother heard any unusual sounds throughout the night. The men went to bed, and the women prepared to stay up all night to keep guard. My mother sewed torn clothing, and my grandmother read a novel she had just borrowed from a friend. And for the second night in a row, they allowed my little sister and me to stay awake and listen with them for as long as we could. Now we're getting into one of our questions for the story. But hours later, seeing the worry on our faces, my grandmother put aside her novel and she told us this story. Why is she telling this story? Question. Once upon a time, a happy family lived in a small village on the shore of the South China Sea. They respected the laws of the land and loved their neighbors very much. The father and his oldest son were woodcutters. and the father was quite old, but he still could carry home a heavy load of wood. One day on his way home from the jungle, he was happier than usual. He and his son had discovered a wild chicken nest containing 12 eggs. Now he would have something special to give his grandchildren when they pulled his shirt sleeves and danced around him to greet him when he came home. Now, his father had broad shoulders, the same broad shoulders as his son, and they had a steady gait, which is a walk, under a heavy load of wood. He smiled at his son as his son was getting older, and he realized his son was a good son, and that his son would grow up to take care of him and his wife. As he was thinking this, he saw his son suddenly throw the load of wood at a charging horse snake that had come out of nowhere. The heavy load of wood crashed into the snake's head and stunned it. That gave them enough time to draw their sharp wood-cutting knives, but instead of attacking the horse snake from the front, the elder shouted to his son to run behind the big bush of elephant grass nearby, while he, who was a little too old to run fast, jumped in front of the snake. Each time the snake passed him by, the old man managed to hit him with his knife. He struck the snake many times and finally became weak and slowed down. So the son came out of the hiding place and attacked the snake's tail, while the old man attacked the snake's head. The snake fought back furiously, but finally succumbed, which means gave up, to the well-coordinated attack of father and son. When the snake was dead, they grabbed its tail and proudly dragged it to the edge of the village. Every single person rushed out to see their prize. They all argued over who would have the honor of carrying the snake to their house for them. Now, the old woodcutter and his son had to tell the story of how they killed the snake at least 10 times, but the people never tired of hearing it again and again and again and again and again. They all agreed that the old woodcutter and his son were not only brave, but clever as well. Then and there, the villagers decided that when their chief, also a brave and clever man, died, the old woodcutter was the only one who deserved the honor of replacing him because he was just so darn clever and brave. When my grandfather finished the story, and we're still wondering why her grandmother finished the story, why did she tell the story? My little sister and I became a little bit more cheerful. People could defeat this dangerous snake after all. It is possible. The silent darkness outside became less threatening. Nevertheless, we were still too scared to sleep in our rooms, so my mother made a makeshift bed in the sitting room close to her and our grandmother. When we woke up the next morning, life in the hamlet, remember Hamlet's a small village, had almost returned to normal. The snake had not struck again that night, and the farmers in groups of 3 and 4 slowly just filtered back to their fields. Then in late afternoon, after everything had seemed to return to normal, there was a hysterical cry for help where they heard in all directions of the hamlet. My cousin and my father grabbed their knives and rushed off to help. It was Min, a farmer, who was crying for help. Min, like most farmers in the area, stored the fish he had caught in the rice field at the end of the rainy season in a small pond. So in China, there's main rivers that go through, and you catch all your fish in various areas, and then you bring them back to your farm area, dig a small little lake, and keep them in like a small little lake, and when you're ready to cook them, you take them out of that lake, so they stay fresh. When Min approached his fish pond, he heard what sounded like someone trying to steal his fish by using a bucket to empty the water from the pond. Min was very, very angry, and he rushed over to catch the thief, but when he reached the pond, what he saw so petrified him, so scared him, that he fell over backwards, speechless. I'm okay. Now, as he did so, he regained control and crawled away as fast as he could and yelled loudly for help. The thief he saw was not a person, but a huge horse snake, perhaps the same one that had squeezed the old horse to death 2 nights before. The snake had hooked its head to a branch, and then its tail to another, and was swishing the water out like a hammock, back and forth swinging its body. Thus, when the shallow pond became dry, it planned to swallow up all of the fish. All the villagers rushed to the scene to help Min, and our village chief quickly organized an attack. He ordered all the men to surround the pond. The 2 young men approached the snake, one at the tail, one at the other end. As they crept closer and closer, the snake assumed a striking position, its head about 1 meter above the ground and above the pond, its tail swaying from side to side. It was ready to strike at either of them. Each man tried to draw the attention of the snake, while a third man crept stealthily, ninja style, to its side. Suddenly he struck the snake with his long knife. The surprised snake shot out of the pond like an arrow and knocked the young man unconscious as it rushed by because it was so big. It broke through the circle of men and went into an open rice field, but it received 2 more wounds on its way out. The village chief ordered all the women and children to form a long line between the open rice field and the jungle and to yell as loudly as they could, hoping to scare the snake so that it would not flee into the jungle. It would be far easier for the men to fight the wounded snake in an open field than to follow it into the jungle. But now there was a new difficulty. The snake started heading towards the river. Normally, a horse snake could beat any man in a race, but since this one was badly wounded, the chief was able to cut off its escape, sending half the men running to the river. Blocked off from the river and the jungle, the snake decided to stay and fight. It's a throwdown. The hunting party surrounded the snake again, and this time 4 of the best men attacked the snake from 4 different directions. The snake fought bravely, but in the end, it perished, meaning died. During the struggle, one of the men received a dislocated shoulder. That's when your shoulder, it pops out. Because see, you have a ball and socket joint, and the ball goes into the joint here, and then when you dislocate it, your shoulder, it pops out. Oh, gross. So dislocated shoulder. 2 had bruised ribs. 3 were momentarily blinded by the dirt the snake had thrown into the people's eyes. And luckily, all of them had succeeded in avoiding the fatal bite of the snake. We rejoiced that the danger was over, but we knew it would only be a matter of time until we would once again have to face the dangerous natural enemy of the horse snake. Dun 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 dun.